Hi, I'm Josh McGrath.
I'm Andrew Haas.
And this is the Art and Pursuit Podcast. Welcome back. Today's episode is titled Low Cost Dating, Why It Shouldn't Break the Bank. We're going to unpack this idea that dating is going to be expensive and that dates should be expensive. I think there's just this cultural assumption right now that men need to have a lot of money in order to be in a relationship. And the reality is that's just not true. So we're going to explore the concept of finances with regards to going on dates and specifically being in a relationship. So let's dive in, Andrew. First question here is, how much money should you spend on a date?
Well, a lot of guys do feel pressure to spend money on dates. In fact, there's a recent survey from a few years ago that said up to 30% of guys do feel a burden to spend. And we just want to talk about some of the dynamics that are at play.
Yes, there are actually a lot of contributing factors that would determine how much one should spend on a date. There's not $1 amount. You know, your financial status as a man matters. Your location geographically, obviously it's more expensive in cities than it is in rural areas. The country that you're in matters. All of that plays into how much you may spend on a date. But I think that right now, many men feel a pressure to have to, make sure that they're planning, they're paying, and they're providing a really great date experience.
And we want to talk about some of the nuances and differences between, there might be an expectation to pay, there might even be a desire to pay versus a guy feeling a burden to pay. And that could even be, a proxy for how much he cares or how serious he is. And so there's, a lot of different angles you can approach this from.
I think that because of social media, again, we harp on social media a lot. While there's benefits to it, there are a lot of negatives. And one of the problems with social media is that people are presenting a dating experience, going on these extravagant dates to amazing restaurants, to amazing locations. And if that, as a guy, is what you're constantly seeing are, people's experiences, so to speak, you can start to think, I don't have the money to provide that. I can't be in a relationship. And men oftentimes assume that, the beautiful, high-value woman is expecting those experiences. And in reality, many women don't expect those types of experiences. What they expect is that a man will pursue them in a way where they're feeling valued, loved, and cared for.
Yeah, a healthy woman hopefully won't expect lavish dates. But social media definitely can, incorrectly frame, even for her, what might be expected.
And we've talked about this before. The point of the dating phase is not to be romantic. There are going to be romantic elements along the way. But if you make your dating experience all about, the romantic moments of, the candlelit dinner, the twilight viewing with wine, the seeing a sunset on the Riviera, like if that becomes what your dating experience is about, you're actually going to be left really unsatisfied, and that relationship isn't headed towards a future of longevity. It's headed towards ultimately ending at some point because it's built upon experiences and how one feels rather than on something sustainable like love and covenant.
If a woman cares about how much money you're spending on a date or how much you're spending on her to go on a date, I would look at that as a big red flag.
Yes, there's actually a 2018 study that was done in the Journal of Personality and Individual Differences that found that men who displayed wealth through luxury goods were often rated more attractive by women. And it's interesting because I think a lot of men feel a pressure, whether explicitly or implicitly, to present themselves in a way where they are more wealthy than they really are, where they have more means than they really do, all in hopes of attracting a high-value woman.
And a guy can be misled into thinking that a woman who desires and looks forward to being spent on, he could see that as, she appreciates the things I do for her. But I would suggest that early on in the dating, and even throughout dating even, spending money on somebody is something that you should shy away from?
You know, if a woman feels more valued because you buy her more things,
Watch out.
watch out. That is a major red flag because a woman's value is not determined by what is spent on her. And I think that's so important for all of our female listeners to understand that your value is not determined by what a man will spend on you, because there are many wealthy men out there who will buy you the yacht. They will buy you the experience, the handbag, the clothes. They'll buy you the makeup. They'll buy you the shows. They'll buy you the penthouse. But they will treat you terribly. They will cheat on you. They will leave you. They will use you as a commodity. They won't value you. And just because they bought you something nice doesn't mean you're more valuable because of that. Your value is intrinsic and inherent, separate from what is given to you by a man. And so one of the things that we need to, recognize as men is that while culture might try to pressure us to say, no, if you truly love her, you'll buy her the really expensive thing, that's going to preclude a lot of men from ever being able to love a woman. And love is an action. And yes, that action may look like purchasing something from time to time, but it's not defined by purchasing something from time to time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there is no overlap between someone's ability to spend money and buy something for someone and their character and who they are and how they will treat you.
Now, there's a few stats here that I think would be very helpful for our listeners just to understand how prevalent this idea of feeling pressured to pay for expensive, extravagant dates really is. Interesting stat here. The average date in America right now costs $123. And I know some of our listeners are going to say, that's not how much I spend on a date. This is the average across all of America.
Yeah, so some are more.
So some are more, many are less, right? If you're in a rural area, you might not spend that much. But even in our area, you go to dinner with two to a nice restaurant, you get an appetizer, an entree, some drinks, and a dessert with tip. Easily drop $123 for two people.
And there's another study in the UK that says 54% of single people say the expense of dating now puts them off, believing that dating has become a luxury.
That is absolutely crazy. And obviously, probably a large percentage of those people are men, right? Because men most often are paying for the date. And the fact that, it's a really sad stat. The fact that, 50%, of people, of single people in the UK believe that dating is now a luxury.
Yeah.
Like,
how misguided.
Yeah, no wonder we have so many single people in our society today. Here's another stat. A 2023 survey found that the average person has spent $3,025.12 on dates over the past year.
Wow.
That is an insane amount of money. Even with inflation, that's an insane amount of money.
That is a lot to spend.
And we wonder why there's so much credit card debt. We wonder why young people don't have, disposable income. Yeah. We wonder why people are struggling financially.
Yeah.
Well, one of the many reasons is because they're spending $3,000 a year on dates. And the crazy thing is this, we've talked about this before, that, your dating phase should not last multiple years, because guess what? The longer that you just continually and perpetually date, the more expensive financially it is. Because now, how are you spending time together? By going out on dates, So let's just pretend that the average price that a person's gonna spend is $3,000 a year, and then they're gonna date for 5 years. That's $15,000 spent on experiences. And if you don't end up in covenant and marriage, you have nothing to show for that.
And the crazy thing is that it actually doesn't have to be this way for any of this.
It doesn't, not at all.
It's all fabricated.
Completely.
And there's another study here that says 29% of people ages 18 to 34 have gone into debt for a date, with 20% exceeding $500 in dating debt in a year.
Which, it's not surprising. If you're going to spend, $3,000 on dating over the course of a year, I can see why, $500 of that may end up being put on a credit card, and you're just creating debt. And with, over $1 trillion of credit card debt out there, what percentage of that is a result of dating?
Probably a lot. So here's the thing. Do not go into debt to go on a date.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just don't do it. And if you can't go on a date because you don't have the money, yeah, don't go into debt to make that happen.
Yeah, there's this weird perception, I think culturally, that people assume that the amount of money that's spent on the date experience equates to a level of seriousness of the relationship. There's no correlation between how much I spend on a date and how serious I am about her, because you can be extremely serious about a woman and never spend $1 on a date.
Yeah. And sadly, culturally, somehow that's become, a proxy for how serious you are, how much you care. It's how much am I willing to spend?
Now, there's this perception out there, at least I think there is, again, I'm not a woman, that I'm aware of, but there's this perception, I think, that women have assumed that men are going to spend a certain amount of money on the date experience for them, and that's the only way to get a woman. And so guys are thinking, oh, I like her, I want to pursue her, but like I know what she's expecting from me financially for these dates, and I just don't have the money, the $3,000 a year to spend on these dates with her. And again, when you're watching all the stupid TikTok and Instagram videos where women are saying he needs to make $600,000 a year in order for me to be with him, you're like, okay, you're buying into a false reality, because the vast majority of women out there aren't saying that, and any healthy, godly, responsible woman that should be pursued is not saying that.
Yeah, if you have to wine and dine a woman to win her over, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you.
Well, yes. Either one.
Maybe you're not
stop.
the guy who should be pursuing her.
Yes.
Now, I think it's important to note that while we're discussing the importance of being, responsible and not frivolous and not going into debt to create and curate, a date experience, there is still a place to be generous and to lavish her within your means.
Sure. And you can look at generosity in this specific context in kind of two lenses. You could be generous toward her, and you can just demonstrate generosity. And I would suggest that it's actually better if you lean toward the latter. You can certainly be generous toward her, and there's a place for that. Gift giving or receiving gifts is a love language.
Yeah.
But so is physical touch.
Sure.
And you've just got to be really careful. Before marriage, there are unwise ways to go about physical touch. And within marriage, you have a much broader expression of that.
Sure.
Same with gift giving. When you are spending money on somebody, you just got to be careful. You certainly can be generous, absolutely. But try to live a lifestyle of generosity that's not directed at her. Have it be something that she could observe, that others can observe.
Yeah.
But, and obviously don't do it for show. If you're just being generous to impress her or others, like that's probably one of the dumbest things you could do.
That's really good advice. The thing that I think about as you're saying that is the fact that men actually throughout the dating process should be working extra hard to be financially responsible, because if they've been listening to anything we've been saying, the reason why they're dating is because they're pursuing something bigger than just a relationship. They're hopefully headed towards covenant. They're headed towards marriage. And so men, while pursuing a woman, should be working extra hard to set themselves up to be financially successful, ultimately for marriage. You shouldn't spend all your money trying to pursue a woman, because that's just unwise. You should be making sure that you're living within your means, that you're budgeting well, but that you're working extra hard to make sure you're setting aside money in preparation for that covenant.
And I really think it's worth reiterating the point that the amount spent does not equal how serious you are. And I think it's just something that guys need to really understand, and women too.
Yes.
Because I think culturally we've kind of shifted toward that, unfortunately.
Yes, it's true. And if you have the money, if you have the means, there are men out there who have great jobs, who have invested well, who have saved well, who have been responsible. They've lived the Dave Ramsey lifestyle. Yes, if you want to spend the $3,000 a year on her, because you have that, sure, go ahead and do that. Again, it's not a matter of a dollar amount.
Right.
It's a matter of principles of wisdom and understanding the reasons behind why you're spending that. Is the reason you're spending that because you want to bless her and you want to share in these great experiences together? Or is it because you feel obligated to because that's the expectation she has of you?
Right. Are you trying to impress her, or do you feel like you have to spend it to keep her affection? It really does come down to motives.
I know people, and maybe you do too, and some of our listeners may know some people who they've been in a relationship, a codependent relationship. It's not just a matter of dating. It's like, they're like living with each other. And I've heard the woman say, I can't leave him because like I can't give up the apartment. I can't give up the nice dinners. I can't give up, whatever. And it's like, she doesn't actually want to be with him, but she's like dependent upon the lifestyle he affords her. And so she stays with him. And it's like, wow, that's really unhealthy. That's bad for every party involved. And if your dating relationship is trending that direction, you need to put a pause on that and you need to involve some authority and accountability. And very likely you'll need to break up because that is an unhealthy recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it's the other side of the coin to people who say that they're not going to get married because, say their combined incomes put them over a certain tax bracket. It's like,
so true.
If that's what you're focused on, you're going about it the wrong way.
Yes. So here's another question. Should the amount of money that you spend increase as the relationship progresses?
Well, since you asked, much like I don't think the amount of physical contact should increase as the relationship goes on. My opinion is that the amount you spend should also not increase as the relationship goes on. There will be a time to spend more, and that's something that the two of you to discuss in marriage, what's appropriate, how much do we have to spend. But in dating, I don't actually think it's helpful or beneficial. It might be fine with no ill consequence to do it, but if someone were to ask me, is it okay to spend more, as you just did, I don't see the benefit there.
Now, let's talk about that briefly, because imagine your first date is buying her a cup of coffee. And so you've spent, $8, with inflation, $30 on your coffee together. Are you saying that you should not spend now any more than $30 until you're married?
I'm saying you could, but I'm saying even if you didn't, you could still have a perfectly fine dating relationship.
Sure. So it's not a matter of it being a principle, try to avoid spending more. It's more of principles of wisdom, understanding that it's not necessary in order to grow closer together or to determine whether you should ultimately be in covenant.
So yeah, I would say that spending more money to go on dates, it's fun and it's enjoyable and it's memorable.
Yep.
But my opinion is that it doesn't actually get you to a place where you're more ready to evaluate, can I marry this person?
So a recommendation would probably be something along the lines of understanding what is the upper threshold limit of what you can afford that's reasonable and wise to spend on a date. And it's not necessary to spend that. Right. Should you choose to, you can. But what's important is to know what that number is.
Yes.
Not I spent $30 on the first date, because what we don't want is a bunch of guys now going out and spending $500 on the first date in an effort to be like, well, you said don't spend any more as the relationship increases.
That's what I get from here on each date.
So the principle is use wisdom and know what the upper threshold is, but understand it's not necessary to determine the things of value.
Yeah, it's not necessary, and know what the upper threshold is, know why you're doing it, and are you doing it to impress her? Or are you doing it because this is a genuine opportunity to bless her or somehow, move the relationship further toward where you can make a decision?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's now move out of kind of being on dates and talk more about being in a relationship. And oftentimes being in a relationship means that you are going on dates. So one of the things that we want to begin to unpack here is the concept of debt, how much money you have, how much money you make, your investments, your savings, things like that. So let's start with the debt conversation here. When in your relationship should you begin talking about the debt that you have and the debt that she has?
I think both of you should be ready to talk about it much sooner rather than later.
Meaning what?
Perhaps not the first date.
Oh, yes, that'd be a little creepy. Hi, I'm Josh. How much debt do you have?
Honestly,
That's why I'm single.
perchance, if you happen to be on a first date,
Exactly.
I could imagine her asking you, how much debt do you have?
Oh, psych.
I think that's a fair question. Now, you're in a place where, you can handle, potentially awkward questions. Maybe it's not for everybody.
Sure.
But at least be open to it. And I would say for her, if you have debt, be open to the person asking about it.
So here's the thing that's important for all men to understand is the conversation of debt must happen before you prepare to propose.
Yes.
Like what you don't want to do is propose and then discover the debt that she has.
Yes.
And for her, she does not want to say yes to a marriage without knowing the type of debt that you have. It is important, and in today's society, with unpaid credit card debt being over $1 trillion, statistically, one or both of you have credit card debt. With student loans unpaid student loans being over $1 trillion, statistically speaking, one or both of you have student loan debt. And then it's not uncommon that people have car payments. So they've taken out a loan, they've got debt there. Probably less likely for a lot of people will be, mortgages. And that's a very different type of debt than car, student loans, or credit card debt. And I would say this. I think that for a man, a woman who has no money is really not concerning at all. But a woman who has $100,000 of student loan debt is very concerning. And it becomes less concerning if that $100,000 student loan debt is because she's a brain surgeon. It becomes more concerning if that $100,000 of student loan debt is because she studied underwater basket weaving.
Exactly. These are really important conversations to have and need to happen sooner rather than later. And don't be cagey about it. If you're hesitant to discuss it, or if you are perceiving that she's avoiding talking about it, heavily weigh that. And for the guy, it's really important that he is transparent and open about the debt that he has.
Yes.
And also, he should probably communicate that it is one of his life principles to get out of debt.
And to be able to demonstrate, we've talked about this in an earlier episode, demonstrate that he's actually paying down on that debt.
Yes.
He should be able to show that over the course of the last 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years, that the debt is decreasing and not increasing. If he has $20,000 of credit card debt, that should be lower than what it once was. It should not be, well, I've had $20,000 of credit card debt for 8 years. It's like, okay, there's a problem here.
Yes, that points to a bigger issue. Yeah. That points to financial irresponsibility and probably some deeper patterns and habits that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. So now let's flip the coin. Savings, how much money you make, your investments. When does that conversation happen in a dating relationship?
And so here, I actually think it's much less important when you share that. I think it's still a good thing to talk about at some point, just to get a better sense of who the person is.
Yep.
But dollar figures and amounts, you could probably talk about it. Do I think you need to talk about it? Before marriage, yes. But how soon? That's a gray area.
Well, I think that for a lot of people that we know, that conversation comes out after they're engaged and they're doing premarital counseling. And for any of our listeners who are unfamiliar with the idea of premarital counseling, in a lot of religious communities, we come from a Christian community, before you get married, you actually sit down with the pastor and you go through premarital counseling. And he will bring up a lot of different topics that maybe you guys haven't discussed and help you walk through those or work through those in order to hopefully prepare you better for marriage.
Because here's the thing, it matters much less, you're pursuing somebody and say she has, I've got money invested in the stock market. It's like, oh, cool. does it really matter if she has 10,000 invested or 100,000 invested or more?
Yeah.
I actually don't think it matters toward are they a good candidate to marry. What I think matters much more is how you spend money.
Yep.
And so your views around how to spend, how to save, how to budget, those are the conversation things. I think actual amounts of like your net worth or how much you have, sure. If the opportunity is there and it makes sense to talk about it, go for it.
And, there's probably more value for her to see that you as the man have some sort of financial means, some type of savings, some type of investment, even if it's minimal, because ultimately what you want to be able to demonstrate is that you are responsible,
Right.
that you do have self-control when it comes to spending habits, that you do have the ability to save. And ultimately, hopefully she's looking at whatever financial resources you have as a way to build a family, not for how am I going to live as your wife. How am I going to buy all the handbags and the clothes and the experiences and the mimosas that I want if you don't have $600,000 for me?
Exactly. Well, that's a really good point because as a guy, you feel like, oh yeah, I got 500,000 in the bank, and she's like, oh wow, he must be really good with money. Hopefully yes, but it's like, well, no, you just won the lottery.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, that's not actually indicative of anything.
Exactly.
And so to your point, it's actually more important if a guy can demonstrate his ability to earn, to work. It doesn't matter it matters less how much, still matters.
Yeah.
And so those can be good things to share. But what's more important to communicate to her is your ability to earn and work. And that kind of points to a future where you can, she has a security that, okay, this guy is actually good going forward.
Yeah, she's looking to see if you can provide for her and if you can provide for your future children together. And if you're demonstrating now that you have an inability to do that, you're much less likely a candidate that she's interested in tethering herself to through covenant, through marriage. And so, like you said, one of the things that men need to be able to do is demonstrate their ability to prove that they can provide. And so men right now, if they're single, if they're not married, I don't even care if they're in a relationship right now, they should be saving money. They should be paying off their debt. They should be making investments. Why? Not so that they can brag and say, look at how much money I have, but so that they can be prepared to demonstrate that I can be a good provider for a wife, for a family.
I'm disciplined. I know how to budget. I know how to handle money. I know how to invest. Right. These are things that guys should practice even well before he's in a relationship. But it obviously is going to play to your favor during.
Now, one of the challenges can be in a relationship is if you have little to no money. Because not everyone, particularly depending on the season of life they're in, will have money. I think about, some people that we know who got married right out of high school or got married, in their first, second, or third year of college.
Yep.
They have no money. They're probably living off student loans, honestly.
Yeah.
So like at that moment, you still need to have a candid conversation where you're like, hey, I don't have a lot of money.
Yep.
I have a couple $100 to my name. And the later you are in life, once you start to get to your late 20s, your 30s, your 40s, you can feel, particularly as a man, if I haven't amassed some type of wealth, that I'm doing it wrong. And you can almost feel like I'm not worthy to pursue a woman because I should have more at this stage of my life. I think that that's a false assumption that many men fall prey to. And so if you're a man, who doesn't have a lot of money, the question is to ask yourself, why don't I have a lot of money? Is it because you've been irresponsible? You've been gambling away? You've been, buying great experiences, going to debt?
Right.
Or is it because you have, maybe it's the location that you're in, maybe it's the vocation you have, or maybe it's a position that God has called you to. Most missionaries out there in the world don't make a lot of money. They're very poor by the world's standards. Does that mean that a woman should never marry a missionary? Absolutely not. Many pastors of small congregations all throughout the U.S. don't make a lot of money. Arguably, they're very poor. Does that mean that a woman should not marry a pastor? No. If you're called to something, if God calls you to something and you're not making a lot of money as a result of your obedience, that's okay. But if you're not making a lot of money because you've been irresponsible,
Right.
well, that's not okay.
That's the problem.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what a guy really needs to pay attention to. You know, as we mentioned earlier, the amount of money you have does not correlate to the quality of your character. Now, hard work and diligence and discipline often result in growing your net worth, and that's good. That's how it should be. But it by no means is a requirement in order to be in a relationship. And in fact, many people have very fulfilling marriages on a very little income.
It's true. Social media has really warped our perspective of what a dating relationship should look like and what marriage should look like when it comes to finances. If I can't afford the beautiful brand new build of a house that's 4,000 square feet in the suburbs of America, I'm not providing for my wife and she's not going to love me and we're going to have a terrible marriage. It's like, well, no, that's actually not required. None of those attributes are determining factors of a healthy relationship, marriage that's going to last. Speaking of marriage, all right, how important are finances? Because why are we talking about finances right now? We're talking about finances now because they actually do dramatically impact marriage. You're married, you've been married for like 15 years. How important is the financial discussion in marriage, and why does it matter in the dating relationship to have this discussion and to prepare oneself, financially speaking?
It matters in the dating phase more so to help you get into the habit and routine of talking about finances. In marriage, I don't know the exact statistic, but a lot of marriages end over financial disagreements.
And specifically, not the amount of money one has in their marriage, but how it's either spent or saved.
Yes. So what you want to work toward in the dating phase and what you want to be thinking about for the future is, you know, how can I talk about finances? How do I approach money? And how can I partner with somebody? How can we do this together? How can we come to agreement? Because at the end of the day, in marriage, it's not about how much money you make. That's not the problem. If you make a little, not a problem. You make a lot, not a problem. Although, you know, they do say more money, more problems. That often plays out to be true.
Sure.
What the bigger issue actually, to what you said earlier, is in how you come to agreement on it. That's really where the breakdown happens. So if a guy and the woman can purpose to come to a consensus on how to save, how to spend, how to give,
and how to
invest.
prioritize finances, right? Because if you prioritize finances in a way where you're just spending it on experiences and goods, and she doesn't, there's a mismatch of alignment and vision on how finances are used.
Oh, huge. It could be a huge misalignment because, even if you have, 20% of your budget is for spending or more, how much are we going to spend on groceries? How much are we going to spend on gifts? How much are we going to spend on, redoing the home? You know, one person might have no interest in redoing the home and the other person might want to spend all of the free money on redoing the home. And it's like, those are the points in a marriage where you have to purpose to come to agreement. And again, it's not on the dollar amount. The dollar amount really doesn't matter. It's really on how you talk about it.
And we see that worked out, way earlier in the dating relationship when it comes to how one spends money on the actual dates. You both want to be in alignment on what the purpose of that date is, and for the man to spend within his means in a way that is honoring and kind and loving to her, but she needs to understand that she needs to recognize that it's not her responsibility to try to push him to spend more money than he has, or to push him to spend more money than he's budgeted. He may have more, but you've got to work out together your vision for what due dates look like.
Yes, because they are a forecast of what a marriage could be, in that when you're in a marriage, it's a really unhealthy dynamic if one person is applying pressure, either overtly or subconsciously even, applying pressure on them to spend money. And in the dating phase, it could look like that. It could look like this expectation, stereotypically, that the girl has for him to spend more on her. A guy can feel that pressure. And in a marriage, that's a really hard and unhealthy dynamic to have to manage if either person portrays a pressure on the other either to spend money or use money in a way that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, excellent point. So as we conclude here, gentlemen, you heard it from the man who's been married for 15 years. This conversation that we had today matters greatly because it impacts your future in marriage. Finances are going to be part of your life until you die. Hate to break that to you. You're never going to get away from the financial discussion, whether you have all the money in the world or you have no money in the world. So here's what we want you to do. The first thing is reflect. Whether you're in a relationship or not, have you experienced the pressure to have a lot of money in order to date, or experienced a pressure to want to have to spend a lot of money on dates? Because that's oftentimes a reality for many men. They feel this pressure to spend a lot of money on dates or to need to have a lot of money in order to date. But the two practical things we want you to do is this. Number one, reject the pressure by culture that says you must spend more money in order to show that you're more serious. That is a lie. It is a fallacy. It is not true. Reject it. Number two, budget out what you're going to spend on dates. All right. We talked about how the average person spends $3,000 a year here in America on dates. That might be a ton of money for you. That might be no money for you. You need to sit down and budget out what you're going to spend in a year, in a quarter, in a week, however you want to break it down on dates. And how you come to that determination will probably be by inviting authority and accountability into this process to help direct you so that you're not being irresponsible with your finances. This is a big topic. A lot of things we covered, bit of a longer episode today, but we hope that this one is helpful for you because we're really trying to tackle the cultural issues that oftentimes paralyze men and prevent them from being able to pursue romantic relationships. As always, we love having you here on the Art of Pursuit podcast, and we look forward to having you here next time.